Okay, brethren, I think you all know that we're in the Passover season at the moment. Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. This is the Sabbath in the middle of all of that. And at this time of year, we tend to look back towards the events surrounding the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which largely relates to ancient Israel being delivered from their slavery and bondage in the land of Egypt. You know, God, by a series of miracles, the 10 plagues in particular, the death of the firstborn, brought Israel out of Egypt, walking behind Moses. And of course, they were overjoyed, they were excited, they were heading off to the promised land. And that particular event we tend to picture year by year on the night to be much remembered or much observed, because it was a night time when they went out. All right. Now, what they perhaps didn't fully realize is that there were going to be a few problems en route. I'm not quite sure what in their minds they thought would happen. It would take at least a few weeks to walk, which we would be doing from Egypt to the promised land. But on the way, there were going to be some tests, some trials, right? And of course, that's not untypical of your calling, my calling. When we are called out of the world, out of the carnal world, and heading off towards, if you like, God's kingdom, there are going to be obstacles, opposition, tests, persecutions, trials en route, right? So as Israel went through the wilderness on the way to the promised land, there are lessons that they experienced for you and me, because our walk will bring us opposition, problems, tests. So in many ways, the experiences of ancient Israel on their journey sort of parallel, at least generally, our experience. And we can see that if we turn first of all to 1 Corinthians and chapter 10. We're going to read verses 1 through 13. So 1 Corinthians and chapter 10. The previous chapter, Paul's been talking about running in a race to get to the prize. He talks about how he disciplines his own body, lest, having preached to others, he himself should be disqualified, cast aside, which he does not want to be. In chapter 10, he then talks about, unfortunately, God's people who were disqualified, who were cast aside. They should not have been, but they didn't run that race and complete it. So we pick up the story there in verse 1. Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, all ate the same spiritual food, all drank the same spiritual drink, all of them, right? Several million in total. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with most of them, God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered ultimately in the wilderness. So they all had the opportunity, right? All, every last one of them. But with most of them, at least the adults we're talking about, I think, they died. They were disqualified. They were cast away. They did not complete the journey. Right? And we think, oh, interesting. And we can look at the story, what would happen to them. We can look at about their adventures, right? And we could say, well, at one level, we're just looking at what Scripture tells us. We're Christians. We should know what the Bible tells us about former times, just out of general knowledge. We could say that, and that's certainly one level. But there's more to it than just being familiar with Bible stories, you know, David throwing the stone at Goliath and so on. Oh, great story to be familiar with, especially if you're a child, right? But it's not just that this time of year we look at the stories of what happened in the past. There's another reason, which is verse 6. Now these things became our examples. To you, to me. These are our examples, to the intent that we should not do what they did. Right? That's what it's written down for, so we can learn from their mistakes. That we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted, and do not become idolaters as were some of them, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. We'll come to that episode shortly. Nor let us, so it's to us, you see, written down, And this time of year, when we're in the Passover season, we look at these adventures, these episodes, these events that took place, not just as bit of history, but because they're examples. Nor let us commit sexual immorality, as some of them did, and in one day 23,000 fell. Nor let us tempt or provoke Christ, as some of them also tempted and were destroyed by serpents. Nor complain or grumble or murmur, as some of them also complained and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written in the historical records that we're going to look at for our admonition or our instruction, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. It's written for us. So this season of the year, I think it's worthwhile looking at least part of the adventures they experienced on their way from slavery to the promised land, and see what we can learn, because they're written to you and me as examples, as illustrations of really what not to do. Verses 12 and 13, therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall, be disqualified and cast away. No temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, which ancient Israel never seemed to quite catch, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation, test, or trial, will also make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. Right? So it's a good time of year, I think, to check them out, see how they did. It seems, from what I can make out, that there are at least 10 key occasions when Israel provoked God, when they tested God, right? Not a sensible thing to do. I mean, God's patient, as you and I would know, as they would see. God's very patient, but there does come a point in time where you can just go beyond that line. And unfortunately, they did. So we're going to review the 10 occasions, 10 key occasions that they stumbled and fell, and see what lessons we can learn. These examples are written for us, so what do we learn? What can we learn? What might we be in danger of copying and imitating, right? So let's turn to Exodus 14, right in the heart of the Passover story, Exodus 14, starting with verses 5 through 12. Now it was told the king of Egypt, Pharaoh, that the people had fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people. And they said, why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? Well, because the country was in ruins, that's why. So he made ready his chariot and took his people with him. Also he took 600 choice chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt, with captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went out, or had gone out, with boldness, with a high hand, because they were overjoyed of the freedom, of to form their own nation, blessed by God. So the Egyptians pursued them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, and his horsemen, and his army as well, and overtook them camping by the sea beside Pi-hahiroth, before Baal-zephon. So you got 600 choice chariots, plus, according to Josephus, 50,000 cavalry, plus, according to Josephus, the historian, 200,000 foot soldiers. So it's quite a large military engagement, 250,000 after people who were slaves, 10 minutes earlier. And when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. So they were very afraid. And the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. And then they said to Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you so dealt with us to bring us up out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we told you in Egypt, saying, leave us alone? We don't want to be rescued and delivered. Let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians as slaves. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. Well, this is only about 3 or 4 days after they left with a high hand boldly, after seeing, 10 plagues and the death of the firstborn. Hasn't taken long, has it, from being high hands and bold to now they're morose and grumbling and murmuring and fearing, and we're going to die here in the wilderness. Why couldn't we have stayed back in Egypt in slavery? What would you say at this stage? Are these guys and gals walking by faith or by sight? Well, they're walking by sight. They can see the armies approaching and the chariots and so on, the dust blowing up, and they expect to die. So, at this stage of the game, no faith in God. The faith that they did have when they left 3 days or 4 days earlier has already evaporated. And of course, you can think in your life that when you and I first started leaving the Egypt of our carnal world, sometimes, there are people come after you to cause you problems, your former friends, some of whom might start to castigate you for your change of heart and so on. Let's read verses 13 through 16. So are they going to die? Well, you know the answer, of course. And Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace." But God doesn't do every single bit of it. There's at least a little bit that Moses has to do. Right? Not a lot. God's doing the majority of it. He's doing the actual part that matters, but there's a little bit of cooperation. And the Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward," because they're trapped. There's mountains to the north, to the south, and the army is coming from the west. And to the east happens to be water. So there's no way to go but up, you would have thought. "But lift up your rod," says God, "stretch out your hand over the sea." Do a little bit, Moses, a little bit of cooperation, "and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea." What? How can that be possible? It's deep water. We'll see a slide into in a moment. But dropping down to verses 21 to 31, "Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued," very foolish, "and went after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen." Verse 24. "Now it came to pass in the morning watch," just before dawn, I guess, "that the Lord looked down from the army upon the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and he troubled the army of the Egyptians, and he took off their chariot wheels."
That wouldn't help.
"So that they drove them with difficulty." Not easy to drive a chariot at speed if the wheels are all falling off. "And the Egyptians said, 'Let us flee from the face of Israel, for Jehovah fights for them against the Egyptians.'" Well, for sure. But unfortunately, a bit belated that they come to their senses. "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians, on their chariots and on their horsemen.'" So God could just do that himself. But he says to Moses, "Put your arm out, bring this rod out and wave it and so on." So a little bit of cooperation with God is often necessary. Not a huge amount. God does most of the actual hard work. Verse 27, "Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and when the morning appeared, the sea returned to its full depth, while the Egyptians were fleeing into it or against it. So the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. Then the waters returned and covered the chariots, the horsemen, and all the army of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them." So, roughly 250,000, including all the horses, of course, as well. Not so much as one of them remained. But the children of Israel had walked on dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. So the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. I guess many floating in the water, many sunk in the water if they got heavy armor on. Plenty of them, by the sound of it, washed up by the waters on the seashore. Verse 31, thus Israel saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt. So the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. Wonderful. Here's a tremendous miracle where you've just rescued the people of Israel, and you've killed 250,000 of the Egyptian soldiers, the cavalry and so on, in the most dramatic way possible. And of course the people believe when they see all this. Question might be, well, how long will that belief be sustained? But before we leave this point here, we've got a couple of slides to show you, just to sort of indicate where these events took place. So that's a sort of a bird's eye view, a very high-flying bird's eye view of the Exodus route. You can perhaps see it in white. It sort of goes from left to right across that central triangle there, down towards the Gulf of Aqaba, the blue bit on the right, blue channel on the right, and there they crossed the Red Sea. Now, many traditional places put Mount Sinai at the bottom of that triangle, but that's inaccurate, I'm pretty sure. So they cross over the blue bit there. The next slide is a close-up of where they cross from Nuweiba on the left, the west, as it says there. It's about 10.5 miles, and it goes all the way down to essentially 2,500 feet, right? But of course that was dry. So God separates the waters. The people walked 10 miles or so across to the right-hand side, the eastern side, which is today in Saudi Arabia. Right? So that's pretty much where it took place. All very exciting. Like I say, the Israelites they can see the carcasses. They can understand the dramatic deliverance. God is all powerful, right? So surely this is a convincing miracle that will last them for months and months and months before perhaps it fades away eventually over time. We'll have a look at Exodus 15. Let's read verses 22 to 26. So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea, where all this took place. Then they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. Not very long, is it? After that dramatic miracle, 3 days. Now when they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore the name of it was called Marah. And the people complained against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? I think the King James and others say murmured. And this is going to be a standard default response. They're always complaining, always murmuring, always ungrateful, always lacking in faith. Right? They can't see it. Their eyes appear to be blinded to God's existence, to his faithfulness. They're always just looking at what they can see. They inevitably walk by sight and not by faith. Now, of course, that's surely a lesson that you and I need to learn, to walk by faith, not by sight. And verse 24, the people complained against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? So he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. When he cast it into the waters were made sweet, pleasant to drink. And of course that's good. And the people are going to be happy but you might have thought, well, surely you can see something here, people. The waters were bitter. He talked to Moses. Moses talks to God. There's a solution. The waters are now quite drinkable, all right, quite pleasant and refreshing. There he made a statute and an ordinance for them. And there God tested them and said, if you diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you.
Amen.
Or I think in Hebrew, I am Jehovah Rapha. I am God your healer. Right? So a little bit of an offer there. Just cooperate with me, walk with me, and you'll be free of sickness and disease, right? But these people don't seem to see God. there's another miracle there. Right? It only took 3 days for them to be fearful and murmuring and grumbling and complaining. But let's move on to the third time they provoked and tested God in just a matter of days almost. Exodus 16. Let's read verses 1 through 3. Yeah, 1 through 5, but let's read 1 through 3 first. And they journeyed from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they departed from the land of Egypt. Well, they departed on the 15th day of the first month, Feast of Unleavened Bread, day 1, and here they are just 1 month later. Then the whole congregation of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. Complain, grumble. You're on the way to the promised land, a land filled with milk and honey. God's in front of you in a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of cloud by day. You've seen several miracles already, incredible ones, and now already you're grumbling. And the children of Israel said to them, "Oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." I mean, pretty provocative. You brought us out. So where's God gone? Have they forgotten there's a Jehovah God anywhere? All they're looking at is Moses and Aaron and shouting at them, accusing them. So they've forgotten God. How could you? But God has despite their provocation, God has a solution. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day, that I may test them, whether they will walk in my law or not." I think we know the answer to that one. "And it shall be in the 6th day that they shall prepare what they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily." We're talking about God providing manna, a miracle. You're in the wilderness and desert areas, right? There aren't any KFCs or Burger Kings or McDonald's anywhere. But God's going to deliver bread from heaven, manna, every day. And on the 6th day of the week, he'll deliver twice as much, right? So that's good. And they can see that, and so on. Let's move down and read verses 16 to 20, which will be the fourth provocation. Verses 16 through 20. Well, yeah. "This is the thing which the Lord has commanded. Let every man gather it according to each one's need, 1 omer for each person, according to the number of persons. Let every man take for those who are in his tent." Got to go out and gather it. God provides it, but a little bit of cooperation, go and collect it. "Then the children of Israel did so and gathered some more, some less. So when they measured it by omers, he who gathered much had nothing left over. He who gathered little had no lack. Every man had gathered according to each one's need. And Moses said, 'Let no one leave any of it till morning.'" That's fairly plain, right? Use it up the day you gather it. Don't leave any of it until morning. Notwithstanding, they did not heed Moses or God, but some of them left part of it until morning, and it bred worms and stank. And Moses was angry with them. So they gathered it every morning, every man according to his need. When the sun became hot, it melted. So these people left it till the next day, despite instructions otherwise. Why might they do that? Well, my suspicion would be that they don't trust God to deliver any more the next day, because you never know what God's going to do. Got some here, a bird in the hand or man in the hand is worth no man in the bush tomorrow. So they didn't trust God. That's my guess. Otherwise, why would you not just use it up on the first day, right? Moving on to verses 23 to 30, still dealing with the manna, and this will be the fifth of these provocations. So verses 23 to 30. "Then Moses said to the people, 'This is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So this would be a conversation taking place on the Friday and saying tomorrow is the Sabbath, Saturday. Tomorrow is a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. And it's holy to the Lord. Might not be holy to the people, like today it's not holy to most people, but it's still a holy Sabbath to the Lord today, right? Bake what you will bake today, boil what you will boil of the manna, and lay up for yourselves all that remains to be kept until morning. Well, normally you don't keep it till the morning, otherwise it will rot and decay and smell. But on a Friday, right, you are to keep some for the Sabbath, for the holy Sabbath. So they laid it up until morning as Moses commanded, and it did not stink, nor were there any worms in it. Then Moses said, eat that today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh day, the Sabbath, there will be none. This is teaching people, of course, to respect and regard the Sabbath. 6 days of the week, do your work, collecting the manna. Seventh day, no, not going to happen. Sabbath is separate, important. God's Sabbath. Now it happened, verse 27, that some of the people went out on the seventh day to gather, but of course found none. God's not breaking his Sabbath. He's not sending any manna on that day. But the people go out. Why? Well, because they're just disobedient, rebellious. And the Lord said to Moses, how long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, for the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore he gives you on the sixth day bread for 2 days. Let every man remain in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the seventh day. So the people rested on the seventh day. So, one of the important lessons there was honor the Sabbath, or honor God who gives us the Sabbath, right? And of course that lesson still applies today. God was unhappy with the people dishonoring him, rejecting his word and his instructions, going out in the Sabbath to do work, right? And of course it's easy, I guess, for us, we're all human beings, easy for us to get a bit casual, a bit careless, but it's the holy Sabbath. Remember the commandment, 10 commandments. Remember the seventh day to keep it holy.
From sunset to sunset.
Right? So it's not just remember the Sabbath day for an hour or something. Go to services for an hour and that's it. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Said in the past, I think, a few times that people talk about you is that person a Sunday keeper or a Sabbath keeper? And you know what I mean by that. But it's not a question of keeping the Sabbath. Commandment is remember the seventh day to keep it holy. Are we holy Sabbath keepers, right? Okay, so let's move on to number 6, Exodus 17.
We're only up to week 6.
I think in the first 6 weeks since they left Egypt, so it's not looking too good, is it? Right at 5, quite serious provocations and rebellion and disobedience. Most of it blown around the fact that they clearly don't trust God. Right? They're going to look after themselves. Going to go out on a Sunday or a Saturday to try and find manna. All right? Going to double up on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because you don't know what's going to happen. The following day, God might not turn up. And the water's bitter, and we're going to complain. Well, let's have a look at Exodus 17, verses 1 through 7. Then all the congregation of the children of Israel set out on their journey from where they were, the wilderness of Sin, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped in Rephidim. But there was no water for the people to drink. So what do? Well, we've been here before. We go to Moses and say, we'd like some water. Would God graciously provide us with water as he does manna and so on? And we look forward to receiving water by another great sign and wonder from Jehovah God. That's what you might have hoped they would have said. But, of course, otherwise. Therefore the people contended with Moses and said, give us water that we may drink. To contend is to argue, right? To threaten, right? So Moses said to them, why do you contend with me? Why do you tempt the Lord? More important. Why do you provoke God? Guys and gals. And the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, why is it you have brought us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst. Now, it might have been maybe a day or two had elapsed, right, that led to this, but they've obviously got, well, looks of it, no trust or no belief in God. They're blaming Moses. You did this, Moses. You brought us out here. What, Moses opened up the Red Sea and brought you through it? Moses is giving you manna day by day? Come on, guys and gals, where's your sense? So Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, what shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me. And the Lord said to Moses, go on before the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand your rod with which you struck the river, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb, the rock. Horeb is also Mount Sinai. And you shall strike the rock, and the water will come out of it, that the people may drink. There appears to be a specific rock. It doesn't say a rock, it says the rock, perhaps a well-known, impressive rock. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. So he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the contention of the children of Israel, because they tempted the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not?
Wow.
Is God among us or not? I mean, it's an insult, right? Absolute insult. The word Massah means temptation. The word Meribah there means contention or provocation, right? You can see the people here, they're just, right? They're just relying on what they see. There's no water. We're going to die of thirst and our livestock, right? And so God has a solution, which is go up to a rock, strike it with your rod, and water will come out. I think we have a slide that's supposed to be, and I think probably is, the rock in question. It's the big one at the top there, with a split you can see at the top. You might see in the foreground, towards the bottom, a figure of a man, which give you an idea of the scale. It's quite a big rock. Right, and and there are people have been over there, a number of archaeologists and Bible scholars, and that area appears to be the right area for the Mount Sinai range, and that rock does have some evidence apparently of water pouring from it sometime in the past, right? So that possibly is it. So there you go. The people say, is God among us or not? Where is he? If he's here, where is he? Where's he got to? I mean, insulting, right? If I was God, I'd have wiped them out of this part already. I wouldn't have waited for another several, right? You can see how quick they are to grumble. Instantaneous almost, just a default. Grumble, doubt, have zero faith and confidence in God. And like Paul said, that's written for our example, our illustration, that we shouldn't doubt as they doubted, right? Let's move on to the seventh provocation against God. Oh, they're piling up, aren't they? Exodus 32, which takes place at Mount Sinai. They've finally got there now. Moses has gone up the mountain. He's up there with God, receiving the 10 Commandments, all the rest of it. But down below, or just along from Mount Sinai, where Moses is with Jehovah God, the people are getting restless. I think you'll understand that. The people are highly dubious characters. Exodus 32, let's read verses 1 through 6 to start with. Now, when the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain of Sinai, the people gathered together to Aaron, or against Aaron, and said to him, come, make us gods that shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him. He's lost. Who knows where he is? We can't wait any longer. And the commentators say this expression here, for as for this Moses, that's quite a contemptuous term in Hebrew. So it certainly suggests that the people gone off Moses quite a bit. And Aaron said to them, break off the gold earrings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, your daughters, bring them to me. So all the people broke off the golden earrings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand, and he fashioned it with an engraving tool and made a molded calf. Or some translations say a young bull. Then they said, this is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt. Oops, God's on top of the mountain, just a few hundred yards away perhaps. So when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow is a feast to the Lord." Then they rose early on the next day, keen to get started, offered burnt offerings, brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. That's quoted in 1 Corinthians 10. Not good, because here's a feast day that they've just made up to honour this golden bull, this golden calf, right, which allegedly points to Jehovah God in some way. And it says the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play, and the commentaries all say that's the Hebrew there suggests an orgy. They're not going to be playing Sudoku or tennis or pass the parcel, right? This is dodgy stuff. The Good News Bible says the people sat down to a feast which turned into an orgy of drinking and sex. And God's just at the top of the mountain there. Right? Not good. Let's read verses 7 to 14. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go, get down, for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves." That was Moses being a little bit, unhappy with the language. "They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They have made themselves a molded calf and worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, 'This is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt.'" Of course, I think a calf or a young bull was a god in Egypt. The Egyptians worshipped such. I think Apis, I think they called it. "And the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and indeed it is a stiff-necked people." Well, for sure. "Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, and I will make of you a great nation." I'll destroy them all. And I'll start again with you, Moses. Interesting offer. Then Moses pleaded with the Lord his God and said, "Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians speak and say, 'He brought them out to harm them, to kill them in the mountains, and to consume them from the face of the earth'? Turn from your fierce wrath. Relent from this harm to your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self, and said to them, 'I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have spoken of I give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever.' So the Lord relented from the harm which he said he would do to his people." So Moses interceded. That's just as well for the people. Moses said, "Well, you don't want people to say that you couldn't deliver them, that you weren't able, right? And of course, you don't forget your promise, Jehovah God, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that you'd bring their descendants back, remember?" Moving on, verses 19 to 28. So Moses heads off back down the mountain now. "So it was, as soon as he came near the camp, he saw the calf and the dancing. So Moses' anger became hot, and he cast the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain." That's the 10 Commandments on 2 tablets. "Then he took the calf which they had made, they burned it in the fire, ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and made the children of Israel drink it. And Moses said to Aaron, 'What did this people do to you, that you have brought so great a sin upon them?'" Moses is, "What happened? I've been gone for, well, to be fair, quite a long time. I think it was 40 odd days up the mountain. And Aaron said, 'Do not let the anger of my Lord become hot. You know the people, that they are set on evil,'" which, to be fair, not entirely inaccurate, right? "For they said to me, 'Make us gods that shall go before us.' As for this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him. And I said to them, 'Whoever has any gold, let them break it off.' So they gave it to me, and I cast it into the fire. And would you believe it? This calf popped out. Hard to imagine, my brother Moses." Well, of course, Aaron was in trouble, it says in Deuteronomy, that God was going to destroy and zap Aaron. So once again, Moses had to do the intercession business and say, "Oh, please, not just here," right? So, yeah. But anyway, moving on. Now, when Moses saw that, verse 25, when Moses saw that the people were unrestrained,
Naked.
and the King James Version says naked, and the Net translation says running wild, probably running wild while naked and while drunk, chasing loose women and whatever. For Aaron had not restrained them to their shame among their enemies. Then Moses stood in the entrance of the camp and said, "Whoever is on the Lord's side, come to me." Open invitation. And I think many came to the sense at that point and did respond. And all the sons of Levi in particular gathered themselves together to him, because Moses was a Levite. It's his tribe, the Levites. So I guess they felt, perhaps a closer relationship to Moses. So the people of Levi approached Moses, and he said to them, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, let every man put his sword on his side, and go in and out from entrance to entrance throughout the camp. Let every man kill his brother, every man his companion, every man his neighbor." So whoever's on the Lord's side, come to me. I think probably most, it dawned on them and they slowed down and felt pretty foolish. But some didn't. Clearly some people just carried on partying, right? So the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses, and about 3,000 men of the people fell that day. That'd be the ones that didn't respond, kept on,
Keeping up.
Of course, so the problems there, you can see a lot of problems there: idolatry, right, immorality, lack of patience. The man who's God's charged to bring them to the promised land is up with God for a few days, a few weeks, I guess. But if God delays answering our prayers, right, which I'm sure at times he does, do we get impatient, start doing things our own way? It always reminds me slightly of the story of Abraham. And God said, of your own flesh, you'll have a son who will inherit all these things. And it didn't happen immediately, so Abraham and Sarah concocted the plan which produced Ishmael, because God delayed. So they tried to find another way of doing it. Well, perhaps Ishmael might be the answer. So we'll take Hagar, and all the rest of it. Better to wait on God. And these people here were very quick, weren't they, to turn to idolatry, to worship God, but their way, right? And Aaron, you can see there, caved in, capitulated. Our eighth test we'll find in Numbers chapter 10. Numbers chapter 10. You can see in that one there that God was very minded to destroy them all. So he is patient. He was patient, but he's probably just thinking, this is never going to work, is it? These people, even at Mount Sinai, when I've spoken to them the Ten Commandments, and Moses, their leader, is up here with me, getting further direction. Even at that point, they're creating an idol to worship, right? Now, they might have wanted the idol to reflect Jehovah, perhaps, and they used the idol as a means to remember Jehovah God in heaven. Maybe that was their excuse. But you can see God's getting seriously provoked by these people. So the eighth test is in Numbers chapter 10. We're going to read verse 33 and then 11, 1 to 3. So in verse 33, so they departed from the mountain of the Lord, Mount Sinai, on a journey of 3 days. And the ark of the covenant of the Lord went before them for the 3 days' journey to search out a resting place for them. It's only 3 days from Mount Sinai. But what's their attitude? Let's look at chapter 11, verses 1 through 3. Now when the people complained, murmured, grumbled, 3 days journey, right? 3 days journey. It displeased the Lord. For the Lord heard it, and his anger was aroused. So the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some in the outskirts of the camp. Then the people cried out to Moses, and when Moses prayed to the Lord and interceded, the fire was quenched. So Moses called the name of the place Taberah, because the fire of the Lord had burned among them. The name Taberah meaning burning. So it doesn't specify, at least in the New King James Version there, precisely what the problem was, right? But a couple of other translations We could read the Amplified translation of verse 1, 11 verse 1. And the people grumbled and deplored their hardships, which was evil in the sight of the Lord, in the ears of the Lord. Or the Message translation, the people fell to grumbling over their hard life. So it does seem, other translations use similar language, that the people were just fed up, complaining, grumbling, nothing specific, just, they're cheesed off. The journey's too long. The way's too long. It's too hard. It's not convenient. They preferred the Burger Kings of Egypt to this desert wilderness stuff, right? And, because of their hardships and their, quote, suffering, they decide to whinge, complain, grumble, and God's had enough, right? Sends the fire in, and maybe several hundred die. And you and I, in our walk through life, heading towards, the end of our life and towards God's kingdom, we should know the sufferings of this present time, which there are not worthy to be compared with the glory that one day will be revealed in us, right? There are sufferings, but not worthy to be compared to the kingdom. Our light affliction, which is but for a season, reflects the eternal glory that one day will come our way, right? But of course, you and I are not. We are prone to grumble at times, aren't we?
Yeah.
Can we endure looking to God, being faithful, or do we grumble, 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 grumble? Let's look at number 9, which is Numbers chapter 11. I'm going to read verses, we're in 11, aren't we? Yep. Read verses 4 through, quite a few, 4 to 6 to start with. Now the mixed multitude who were among them, some translations say the rabble,
NIV,
the riffraff,
ISV.
right? These went out of Egypt with Israel. Now the mixed multitude who were among them yielded to intense craving. So the children of Israel also wept again and said, "Who will give us meat to eat? We remember the fish which we ate freely in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic. But now our whole being is dried up. There's nothing at all except this manna before our eyes." So you get the picture, right? Life was far more comfortable. The meals were better. Back in slavery in Egypt, we had garlic, onions, melon, fish. All we got now is this manna every day, nothing but manna. And so
Sounds like my cooking here, so.
they want something different. Probably stirred up by the riffraff, right? Riffraff are the ones who are intense craving, and they just probably worked up all the people around them, which can happen. And of course, nothing wrong with having a desire for good things, but intense craving to the point where now you start to imply that God's a nasty piece of work. All he's got for you is manna, 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 manna. Verses 10 to 15. Then Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, every one at the door of his tent, and the anger of the Lord was greatly aroused. Because it's, again, ingratitude. They could have asked, said, well, we appreciate the manna, but I wonder if there's a possibility of maybe a change for a day or two. Maybe God, Jehovah. Moses was also displeased. So Moses said to the Lord, "Why have you afflicted your servant? Why have I not found favor in your sight, that you have laid the burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I beget them, that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom, as a guardian carries a nursing child, to the land of which you swore to their fathers? Where am I to get meat to give to all these people? For they weep all over me, saying, give us meat that we may eat. I am not able to bear all these people alone, because the burden's too heavy for me. If you treat me like this, just kill me here and now, if I found favor in your sight. Don't let me see my wretchedness." So poor old Moses is struggling a bit, isn't he? So thankfully God adds a few assistance to him in the next verse or two. But let's drop down to verses 18 to 23. "Then you shall say to the people, consecrate yourselves for tomorrow, and you shall eat meat. For you have wept in the hearing of the Lord, saying, who will give us meat to eat? For it was well with us in Egypt. Therefore the Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat." But there's a problem. You shall eat, not one day, nor 2 days, nor 5 days, nor 10 days, nor 20 days, but for a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils and becomes loathsome to you, because you have despised the Lord who is among you, and have wept before him, saying, why did we ever come up out of Egypt? So they despised God. They rejected God. They treated God casually. There's no regard at all for Jehovah God. Why did we ever come out of Egypt? We just stayed there. God's plan is to bring them back to the promised land, or bring them to the promised land, as per Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God's performing great miracles, destroying the Egyptian empire, bringing 2 million people-ish towards the promised land, and all they're doing is regretting every day. And Moses said, the people whom I am among are 600,000 men on foot. That's strong men, warrior men, in total perhaps 2 million odd. Yet you have said, I'll give them meat, that they may eat for a whole month. Shall flocks and herds be slaughtered for them, to provide enough for them? Shall all the fish of the sea be gathered together for them, to provide enough for them? And the Lord said to Moses, has the Lord's arm been shortened? You forgetting something, Moses? Now you shall see whether what I say will happen or not. Let's drop down and read verses 31 to 34. Now a wind went out from the Lord, and it brought quail from the sea, and left them fluttering near the camp, about a day's journey on this side, about a day's journey on the other side, all around the camp, and about 2 cubits above the surface of the ground. And the people stayed up all that night, all that day, all night, and all the next day, quite a lot of time actually, and gathered the quail. He who had gathered least gathered 10 homers. And one commentary says a homer is enough for a donkey to carry. Donkeys are quite strong, little beasts of burden. So 10 homers is a lot of quail to have gathered, enough to load up 10 strong donkeys. And they spread them out for themselves all around the camp. It's probably greedy, isn't it, to get 10 donkey loads of quail. Quail aren't particularly big birds, are they? But while the meat was still between their teeth, before it was chewed, the wrath of the Lord was aroused against the people, and the Lord struck the people with a very great plague. So Moses called the name of the place Kibroth Hattaavah, because there they buried the people who had yielded to craving. The name Kibroth Hattaavah means graves of lust. So you have to read between the lines a little bit. But my assumption here is these people are greedy, right? I think gluttony is evident, right? And of course, gluttony is one of the 7 deadly sins, they used to say. And I suspect there's no gratitude. God's provided the meat that they lusted after. I'm going to guess that when they, cooked the quail, that they didn't ask grace before meals. I imagine they just tore at it after all that manna. He says, the quail, cook it, nice roast chicken, roast turkey, roast quail, grab at it, tear at it, eat it. No thanks to God, no appreciation. And God, I've had enough of this. So, sends a plague, and lots die, and lots are still buried there. The carcasses are still there, right? And of course, I think that's partly down to the riffraff. They're the ones that initially craved intensely, and then they worked up everybody else. You have to be careful about the company you keep. Bad company corrupts good manners, Paul said to the Corinthians. So our 10th and final, I think we can find in Numbers 14. And this takes place just after the 12 spies have been sent off into the promised land to survey it, find out what it's like, and come back and report to Moses and the people. And of course, they came back. 2 of the spies said, pretty good, let's go. 10 spies said, terrible, we're all going to die. We're doomed, we're all going to die. Right? And that's where we enter chapter 14. So all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation, everybody, said to them, if only we had died in the land of Egypt. It's like a broken record, isn't it? They're always just looking back to Egypt. Should have stayed there. Well, we're happy being slaves. If only we had died in this wilderness, Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? What's God's plan? To kill us out here? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? So they said to one another, let's select a new leader. Let's return to Egypt. Got to go back. Incredible. What does God make of this? Are these the people he can bring into the promised land? A land flowing with milk and honey, and turn it into a great nation? Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation. But Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes, and they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, the land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. Not a good land, an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land. Give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them. The Lord is with us. Don't fear them. So Joshua and Caleb are trying to encourage the people. Let's go. This is a fantastic place. Let's go for it. And all the congregation said, okay, amen, hallelujah, let's move forward. All the congregation said, stone them with stones. At that point, God turns up. Now the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of meeting before all the children of Israel, before the stoning could start. The glowing light and fire of God appears at the tabernacle of meeting. I guess that distracts the people from stoning poor old Joshua and Caleb. So God's, again, had enough, decides, got to wipe this lot out. Moses once again intercedes, please don't do that. Please forgive them. Right, so let's pick up the story in verses 17 to 35. And now I pray, says Moses to God, let the power of my Lord be great, just as you have spoken, saying, the Lord is long-suffering and abundant in mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression. But he by no means clears the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation. Pardon the iniquity of this people, I pray, according to the greatness of your mercy, just as you've forgiven this people from Egypt, even until now. So Moses is pleading with God, please forgive them, please forgive them, please don't destroy them all. The Lord said, I have pardoned according to your word, but truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, because all these men who have seen my glory and the signs which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have put me to the test now these 10 times, have provoked me these 10 times, and have not heeded my voice, they certainly shall not see the land of which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who rejected me see it. They've gone too far. They've crossed that line. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit in him and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land where he went, and his descendants shall inherit it. Of course, that would include Joshua as well. Now the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwell in the valley nearby. Tomorrow turn and move out into the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea. Turn. You're not going forward. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, how long shall I bear with this evil congregation who complain against me? I've heard the complaints which the children of Israel make against me. Say to them, as I live, says the Lord, just as you have spoken in my hearing, so I will do to you. The carcasses of you who have complained against me shall fall in this wilderness, all of you who were numbered, according to your entire number, from 20 years old and above, except for Caleb and Joshua, you shall by no means enter the land which I swore I would make you dwell in. But your little ones, whom you said would be victims, I will bring in, and they shall know the land which you have despised. But as for you, your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness, and your sons shall be shepherds in the wilderness 40 years, and bear the brunt of your infidelity, your unfaithfulness, until your carcasses are consumed in the wilderness. According to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, for each day you shall bear your guilt 1 year, namely 40 years. And you shall know my rejection. You've rejected me, now I'm rejecting you. I, the Lord, have spoken this. I will surely do so to all this evil congregation who are gathered together against me. In this wilderness they shall be consumed, and there they shall die. So, woof, that didn't end too well, did it? So, God's very patient. Well, you've seen that, right? But there comes a point when you've just gone too far. And like somebody said, you can take Israel out of Egypt, but you can't take Egypt out of Israel. They're just... And, of course, the lessons are there for you and for me. We're on a long journey, right? And we're going to meet obstacles and tests and trials. We're going to fall down here and there. Easy to grumble, right? Especially if we lean on our own understanding and not see God in the hard places. But, the two good spies, they believed God. They were faithful. And that's the example that we should follow. The two good spies who made it to the promised land. Not the other bunch endlessly carping, complaining, rejecting God, being ungrateful for everything that happened, right? Theirs is a better example. If we finally close by turning to Romans 15. So this time of year, when we're in the Passover season, the unleavened bread season, I think it's good to remember the events of those days, especially since Paul said, they're written for us to learn from. But Romans chapter 15 says something pretty similar, so we'll close there. Romans 15, verses 4 and 13. Verse 4, for whatever things were written before were written for our learning. Talking of the scriptures, right? Whatever things were written before were written for our learning, that we, through the patience and comfort of the scriptures, might have hope. So what we can look at in the scriptures, the lessons that people made, the mistakes they made, the overcoming that they achieved at times. Joshua and Caleb, they made it, and so on, right? Verse 13. Now may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, that you may abound in hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. So God is the God of hope. Hope in biblical terms being a confident expectation. We have a great future, right? They blew it. They didn't make the promised land. You and I are still on that journey, heading towards our promised land, the kingdom of God when Jesus returns, right? Not too far off, hopefully. Not too sure exactly, but not too far off. That's my hope at least. But, I have to keep on running that race to get to the end of the race, right? And not default by giving up and being cast away. That was Paul's concern. He disciplined his body, kept it under him, lest he be cast away or disqualified, as all the people, and then he mentions them in 1 Corinthians 10, all the people that left Egypt, all of them went through the Red Sea, all of them were baptized, all of them were on the way to the promised land, and yet none of the adults made it, other than Joshua and Caleb. You and I, our example should be Joshua and Caleb, and hopefully not too long now before we get to the promised land, the kingdom of God. Hopefully not too soon. Okay, not too long, should say, yeah. Hopefully it will be fairly soon. That's us for now, so we'll complete our message there.